This is the nameless protagonist. It's been some time. I believe you guys can see the title, and we have a long overdue topic for today. We will be discussing the idea and concept surrounding what I've called lately this idea of political Mandalorianism. I do want to take some time to let a couple folks come in first before we get started, but we can certainly make a couple acknowledgments in the meantime. Not sure if everybody's here that's messaged, but got Cynical Optimus. Os. Toya. Os. Grab Second Gear Eddie. Os. F Holiday. Os. Good to see you again, fam. Mr. Should to you. Os. Ebo Sosa. What's good? Os. Chaos Rain. Os. What's good, man? Ismail Thomas. He says, Os. Great to hear from you, fam. Good to hear from you too, man. And let me know if you guys can hear me all right, if the volume's fine, if I'm fading in and out. My mic has been pretty fussy with me lately. So you can just hit a 1 in the chat if you can hear things okay still. Admiral Smoke says, Os, this is the way. Ware ware no Michi. This is the way. It looks like we've got a couple people so far, so might as well go ahead and open up the dojo formally. Firstly, to the founders of the space, Os. To those of you who are listening now and in the playback, Os. This is the nameless protagonist. I have been a long time waiting to do this topic. And for a while, I mulled over whether or not I should have this be 6 or 7 precepts, or the way I even want to present this ideology. I think I've given a reasonable primer in the description, so feel free to take a look at that at your nearest convenience. However, the ideas that I'll be presenting here are nothing more than my subjective opinion, and they're designed to be this way. I am not a political science doctor. I am not an individual directly involved in the way in which politics is typically described by the general media. But we will be viewing these things from a very martial perspective, because it is, again, my subjective opinion that should you belong in the American Black intellectual social complex, and in general, those of you who wield a Y chromosome in the first world and dare to speak outside of normal convention, you may find that these things resonate with you to a degree to which is universal, and it is intended to be that way. It is intended to scale with what is to come, at least from the trajectory with which we carry currently. And while we can't predict the future, it is in our ability to decide a course of action that is originated in responding. That is accountability. That is the concept, the energy that will animate these concepts going forward. I think it may be appropriate to make this a series, and I was originally going to say my piece on it and walk away. But I think I will use this as an opportunity to, when the need arises deeply, we can revisit these concepts and ideologies. They're not intended to serve as a means by which individuals can create dogma or a religiosity that crystallizes a way of thinking. These terms are guidelines, a kind of training wheel. But I think that even training wheels have their purpose when they're used at the right time. And the idea of having written words and spoken forms, especially when it pertains to the martial sciences, is to eventually transcend them. Consider these as intellectual kata with which you formulate a perspective that can be applied to multiple things. I think it is in that spirit that I will begin with the general preamble of political Mandalorianism. We did get a couple more people who came into the chat, so we'll go ahead and acknowledge them and get started. LXST says reporting from the conclave. Os. We got Wrench Turner here. Os. The Equalizer. Os. Onk. Os. Drew Main. Indeed I do. Sorry to keep you guys waiting. Detroit 0861. Os. Venom K, you were here earlier, fam. Os. Appreciate the support. Trail Bentley. Os. Aquatechy, good to see you, man. Os. Wanna be Mystic. Os. So, why Mandalorians? I think, in general, the idea of the Mandalorian caught my attention. Because, as we know, firstly, from the practical sense, having these conversations recorded in the way in which that they are now, oftentimes it's best to have a form of codification. I am of the strong opinion that symbols in codification speak more true and are more versatile and can condense more information and useful concepts within them than the written word oftentimes. And there's a kind of symbology that I think is a very common motif when we examine the history of individuals classified as black here in America whose ancestors were part of the transatlantic slave trade. And even before then, even if you were here indigenously, there is a kind of pattern of the lone skilled individual who is part of a classification that is known to have a particular skill set. And that skill set permits you with the ability to have autonomy in any environment you find yourself in. That is the story of the freedman. Before the freedman, that was the story of the skilled craftsman who even made his way on the plantation. Going further back, that is the way of the maroon warrior who worked in conjunction with the indigenous population here and found a way to carve out their freedom both here in North America, in the Caribbean, and in South America. These stories are legion. Even when we get into those who would be classified as colonizers, our ancestors also took part in that to some degree as skilled navigators and warriors. Skill sets that have been cultivated by the sands of what is known as the Sahara. Those same skill sets of traversing the sky and the sand were used to traverse the many oceans. It's in this tradition that the lone skilled individual, armed with competence and aptitude and an awareness of their environment, is able to operate in a myriad of environments. When we see the Mandalorian, at least in the particular time frame in the lore in which we see them now, to me, subjectively, and to many of you contemporarily, I think it resonates just as strongly and is applicable to our current modern day situation here in the English-speaking West. I want to present a baseline to start from. It will orientate the concepts that we'll be going forward through. We'll start with the definition of war. War, when negotiation and diplomacy have failed, becomes a spectrum through which politics can be made realized, which is defined as hard, soft, and smart modalities, with the object of compelling the opponent to one's will. Policy is the root of all politics, and the difference between state, corporation, party, and entity is a matter of scale. In other words, you take an individual, entity, party, state, corporation, they form policy. And to see that policy made realized, they utilize politics. And politics requires a strategy. And the strategy through which that politics is made realized can be through diplomacy, negotiation, or war. So too can war be employed in various ways. The object of war, therefore, is not to kill or destroy your opponent, but to confer and impose your will upon them, so that they will submit to your policy. This can be made realized by hard power, conventional military force, soft power, unconventional, and modalities such as propaganda, economics, espionage, and even cultural influence in particular. And lastly, smart power. Far more utilized now in this current environment. They are able to make use of hard assets and soft assets simultaneously and algorithmically to acquire various outcomes and efficacy in combat. What that ultimately means is when you are no longer in a state of being able to negotiate or have diplomacy, and politics is still present, you are by definition in a state of war. Whether that war is open and hot or in the shadows and cold, you are still at war. As an individual, you can engage in this activity. As a party, you can engage in this activity. As a corporation, you can engage in this activity. And as a state entity, you can engage in this activity. The only difference is the matter of scale. The scale is what we come to understand, what we give these orthodox definitions of war to. And you can find yourself in a position where you've been at war and had no idea. Those of you who have understanding, a measure of martial sciences, who've been in the military and are aware of the various MOSs, AFSCs, and special departments that have been put together to actually master these things, you understand. That's why for many of us, we have a very distorted bubble version of what we believe to be politics. I want to strip away the sensationalism. I want to strip away the extremism. I want to strip away all of these additional extras that cloud the real view of what's happening on the field of conflict, so that you can respond with authority with regard to your autonomy and make correct action in the environment you find yourself in. This is the spirit of political Mandalorianism. It is not a political doctrine. If anything, it is a military strategy. This is taken as a given that we are no longer in a state of negotiation and diplomacy. And when in this condition, these axioms will serve as a guideline for you to consider as you move in the various environments you find yourself in, both here and abroad, and wherever you find yourself in time space, whether it be 20 years from now, or if you live through the Industrial Revolution long enough, 100 plus. These things should remain relevant so long as human beings are human beings with an autonomic limbic and prefrontal cortex. They will remain relevant. before we continue, go ahead and do a few more acknowledgments since more people have come in. And feel free to ask about anything that's been spoken about so far before we get into the axioms proper. I get the sense that this isn't going to be a very long video here, but I want to really use this as a baseline for people to refer to later. And I do plan on having more in-depth panels about concepts such as moral authority, hard, soft, and smart power, the way in which it's being utilized now, and discuss what potential models of the future may look like, and how strategies can be made now so that you can be better prepared for what may be. That is the idea of Ken no Sen. Simeon Anderson. What's up, fam? We got Maggie Thompson under the veil. I'm indeed back. Hope everything's going well. My fam from the Congo. Mbote Mpangi fam. How you doing? Indeed he has, man. Rael's been cooking up some work here, man. We got Compassionate and Callous. Glad you can make it, man. We've been kind of talking about this behind closed doors also. So been some updates, man. We got a couple topics to go over eventually too, man. So definitely hit me up in the email when you get a chance. Okay, so he was in the military also. Thanks for your service, family. We got Detroit 313. Says salutations. Indeed, fam. McDrama Bear. I like the idea of assuming we are already at war. Indeed. I think that people have oversimplified what this term means, because unfortunately, in the developed first world, oftentimes, these things have been outsourced to both the state and through technological means to account for one's awareness of where you are in the world and the various forces that have been influencing you. If you just simply aren't aware of these influences, how would you even know that you're being accosted, that your free will has been challenged, and that you're operating in accordance to a policy of which you don't even know was even written in the first place? Again, the keys are in the absence of negotiation and diplomacy. Should politics still exist, you are in a state of war by default. All-Star G says, greetings everyone. Blue socks. Complex Design is here. Says, business is the art of nonviolent warfare. Indeed, there is an axiom that is often used by samurai back in the day, where when they were beginning to employ their business models, because they were being forced to, as the samurai class was finding themselves out of work and their lords were less able to provide for them stipends as they used to, since the Edo period had introduced a realm of peace. It was said that samurai should conduct business as though they were at war and conduct war as if they were at business. The Equalizer 23, he says, will you provide books or research that accompany this session? I absolutely can. And what I'd like to get into is actually having some streams that center around the literature that would help flesh out more of these concepts, and perhaps have it accompanied with some historical and possibly current illustrations of some of the axioms we'll cover today. But for certain, we will be talking about hard, soft, and smart power. And there's some subject matter experts I'm going to be leaning towards to invite them up to speak on this as well. And they can offer their experience in dealing with that in the real world in a military capacity. Shaka Nulu. Good to see you, fam. Peace and shalom. Romello 747 Bankai. If I wasn't curious, I would have not found you, nameless. I'm glad you did, fam. You're always welcome here, man. Don't forget to like and subscribe and stay posted. I think you'll see a lot more of my posts in the very near future now. Ryle says war is always at hand. What matters is the scale. Indeed. Indeed. Says, do you speak Chinese or Japanese? I know the only Chinese I have extends to about ni hao. That's about it. Okay, and Maggie's talking to somebody. 20 minutes in. We'll get to the axioms now. I appreciate your patience. We'll begin then with the first axiom. It is the most simple, and arguably, if you heard nothing else today, use this as your guideline to set the tone and have an understanding of the real essence of this concept, and you'll be fine. Axiom 1. Political Mandalorianism. Political parties are tools, not families or religion. I don't know how more plainly clear that could be stated. I suspect very highly that due to the rapid expansion of technological advancement from the 1850s going forward, that it set a precedence for people to find certain aspects of human nature to be replaced with this idea of something that is seen as more, quote, efficient or greater than, or because it's newer, there is a context or connotation of better. It is the beginning of this trinket consumerism where science, rightfully so, occupies the space of superstition and spiritualism. I think that when Nietzsche wrote that whole concept of thus spoke Zarathustra, and the idea that God is dead was presented, really speaks to a bit of foresight as to what was happening to society when it let go of its past traditions too quickly for newer technology and newer ideas, both physical and non-physical, that completely left vulnerabilities that they had no ability to understand the consequences of in the tiny window they had to work with. I think what ends up happening is, currently, we're starting to see that over time, things like political ideology have begun to take the place of things like religion. People cling to this idea of left and right, and it really leans in heavily to deeply ingrained concepts within the human psyche. I think you can just look back to what they were doing with Rome to control various populations. And they would have these faction wars, I believe they called them. And it was like red, blue, green, and yellow. And everybody would just vehemently choose a faction, and they'd be ready to literally kill one another over declaring who was going to win and not win. It is an old part of human psychology that is likely responsible for human beings making it out of the various stages of development that it did. But what the Industrial Revolution had a tendency to do was outpace the rate that your culture could come up with solutions. I speak about that when I mention the verbal martial art form, particularly sword form 2, when I got into environmental mastery. I talked about how technology and culture overlap like a Venn diagram to form the environment. They interplay with each other in various ways. If you go too far in one direction, you find yourself alienated in a way where you're unable to properly respond to the problems that the technology has created. But then the external pressure of trying to keep up, because if you don't have enough of the technology, then those that have superior technology ultimately surpass and usurp you. That's the issue. It's not a greater than lesser than dynamic. It's a matter of balance. And this will be a recurring theme, I think, in some of the conversations I have in the future, that balance is what is being given up for this quick, easy consumption of equality. And while that's a small digression, it ties us back as to why this first axiom is so important. Political parties are tools, not families, not religions. In the same way technology is there to serve you, so too are politics nothing more than technology. They are social technology, and they are there to serve you. Animated with policy, you are able to engage in negotiation and diplomacy, and if need be, war. Ware no Michi. This is the way. Axiom 1. Axiom 2. Better to be the power spoken to than the other way around. Better to be the power spoken to than the other way around. I will admit a measure of bias. And while lately I have lessened my frustration and vitriol for this individual, because in all fairness, I believe, like many others, he was acting according to the times that he found himself in. This individual, Frederick Douglass, I believe, is largely responsible for setting the tone behind which we understand our political strategy, which is to run up to the man and speak truth to power and tell him like it is. His proteges, those such as W.E.B. Du Bois and the further idea of the talented 10th, continued to pursue political ideology in this method. I think that in many instances, in the absence of those that are skilled in martial strategy, you can find yourself in awkward positions. When you're attempting to utilize negotiation and diplomacy, and it's known that you don't have the martial capability to resist, what you get is something akin to placation or a delusion. How is it that an individual with no ability to enforce their will on others, who are you to make demands of those that have the ability to make you go away in an instant? This is my primary criticism of the Atlantic Address. Those who are intelligent and understand military strategy in your position, you would not draw attention to yourself while you are building silently in the shadows, providing the means by which you can wage war. Those who are skilled at war understand that for the most part, aside from intelligence, the one thing that determines, at least on a field level, whether you succeed or fail, is logistics. This is why, and do excuse the digression, this is why many people who look at the United States as a military power, they believe, our military, our army is powerful. We have these advanced weaponry. We have all of this ability to defeat people on the field of conflict by way of our weaponry. No. If I told you that there's some third world countries that have the ability to outfight us on the floor, person for person, you would be embarrassed. With the exception of supreme fighting orders such as Delta Force and other notables like the Green Berets and various other special military groups, The one thing that makes you superior to other armies outside of intelligence is logistics. And there is one thing the United States has over everybody currently. The ultimate bottleneck of any war is your Navy. We have one of the greatest navies on planet Earth. And as a result, we can launch and supply and have logistical throughput anywhere, everywhere, at all times. The foundation of logistics is production and industry. And that is precisely what those such as Booker T were pushing. Precisely those such as Marcus Garvey were pushing. Precisely what was being put in alignment at Haiti, which is what they were pushing. All of these things have nothing to do with, quote, speaking truth to power. It seeks instead to be the power spoken to. And I'd like to cite Rael. I ran this by him and he made an important statement. He said the only ones I've ever seen speak truth to power, to your point, Nameless, are jesters. And I wholeheartedly agree with him. And I'll leave it at that. Axiom number 3. The lowest common denominator is the lifeblood of any system. Act accordingly. The lowest common denominator is the lifeblood of any system. Act accordingly. I could go on and on about thermodynamics and how the way people have a very sore lacking of understanding on how systems actually work. They get caught up in this idea of extremes and exceptions being seen as some standard that's supposed to be followed, and failing to realize that at the end of the day, it's your baseline that gets the majority of the work done. I think many of you have seen this concept, not just in the space, but in its utilization in corporate America and even in politics, where there's situations where 80% of the majority of work is done by 20. There are instances where those individuals that are doing the majority of the work aren't necessarily your best or your brightest. Those at the very top assist you in closing the gap from 80 to 100. It's to say that the effort that's required to go from 80 to 100 is the same as it took to go from 0 to 80. But if you discount that which is required to go from 0 to 80, you are a fool if you can think that you'll be able to stay competitive with those who are not operating that way. I can't think of any system that doesn't rely on its average to succeed. In fact, the sign of a good system is a consistent average. That applies to every system. We understand this when we see this in all other things. One of the most obvious is the economy. You can't find a solid capitalist economy that is strong without a strong average. The demonification of that which is seen as lower or average is a testament to the misunderstanding of what it means to operate a system. As it relates to politics, or as advanced as your society may be, there are only less than 5 to 10% of that society that is pushing your barriers beyond what you normally would be able to do. There is no class of individuals that are super inventors that are just turning out people like this in droves by the millions. Innovative breakthroughs happen from people who go against the grain at the most mundane, random seemingly aspects of things that are found. Go take a look at all of these theories that we have currently. The majority of these things were found on accident. But you needed a constant, a baseline to operate from with which to even have that be made realized. You can't just sideline the entirety of a field because they're not Einstein. You need individuals that create the groundwork through which Einsteins can be made realized, and to make that happen, you use a system. The goal of the system is to create a strong average, to eliminate the degree of entropy on one side so that you can limit negative outcomes and outstates and or macro states to have better micro states that are in your favor. That is not done through equality, but through equilibrium. Equilibrium. In other words, you must take account for what you have. And if there's something you want, you have to build a system to get there. In the absence of creating a system, what you are dealing with is chaos. And eventually, those who have created another system will find in that chaos a means by which they can come up with stronger consistence. And it's the consistency that will find you outpaced in the long run. This will become more important as we get into the other axioms, but this needs to be understood as a baseline. The purpose of every system isn't for the extremes. It's for a strong average. As a result, the lowest common denominator is the lifeblood of any system. Act accordingly. That includes voters. They're not all going to be political scientists. You'll need to meet them where they are and respond accordingly. That leads us to axiom number 4. Facts win debates, but emotions win elections. Facts win debates, but emotions win elections. For those who are involved in political science, and this will be, I try to mitigate talking about this, but the statement is more of an olive branch to humanize this concept a bit more, because it's more than just politics that this applies to. I only said this in the context of politics because that's the topic of discussion, but you'll find that in almost everything where another human being is involved, the overwhelming majority of what animates and contextualizes everything is emotional. And I did a video on this, and you're free to go take a look at that again. And I broke down the difference between emotions and feelings. And I use the parallel of emotion being lightning and feeling being thunder. The two appear to happen simultaneously, although there is a rhythm and order of operations that occurs. The lightning is always first, and then the thunder occurs afterwards. What most of us call emotion, and oftentimes erroneously vilify, is actually feelings. They're not the same thing, nor are they fraternal, but they are connected to a similar event. Feelings, in other words, are the result of emotions. Emotions are what make you human. The key to your feelings is that they are a translation for your emotion manifested in physical form so that you can be informed on the presence of the emotion to start with. They are, in other words, a tool, and it can be used to hinder you, or it can be used as a means to empower you. In general, what you'll find is that this emotion can extend to both micro and macro states. This is how you get concepts that many philosophers and psychologists before the 50s were getting involved with. This idea of collective unconscious. As we continue to learn more about the nature of our minds and how quantum entanglement may play a much larger role in the way neurons operate with one another, so too would it make sense that other people's minds could find ways of entanglement as well. What that implies, and what we have noticed through common sense, is emotion can be contagious. For example, those of you who have seen human beings from not just here in the English-speaking West, but the world over, rage looks the same in every language and every culture. It doesn't require an explanation. It doesn't even require words, though they exist. We recognize them instantly. There are entire sciences dedicated to learning and understanding what unites human beings irrespective of their culture or their particular genetic ethnicity that are common when it comes to conveying emotion. These things are not evil. They are fundamental to human existence and experience. They're tied to connection. They relate to who and how we communicate. It's even the reason why you have eyebrows. They're directly connected to this idea of trust. And you'll learn that for any institution to succeed, if you don't have trust, you have absolutely nothing. These things serve to understand and to gain a window into the emotions of those that we're speaking with. This is not something that makes you weak, nor is this something that is inherently greater than or lesser than in any gender. It is a human phenomenon that quite literally does extend to other entities with consciousness in a way that is far more universal than we may even anticipate. As a result, when it comes to the fundamental things that matter with human beings, you can present all the logic in the world that is presented to the prefrontal cortex, this amazing part of our brain that deals with willpower and our ability to act as a first-person viewer of this phenomenon we call life. But anybody that studies the mind understands that the majority of the power sits in the limbic system. It is behind the prefrontal cortex. It is in a state that is inaccessible for most people from the prefrontal cortex orientation. And what's even stronger than that is that which resides in the limbic system, which is even more powerful than both of them put together. And if you want an actual illustration of that point, try holding your breath. I guarantee you, what makes you keep from holding your breath isn't you, quote, passing out due to lack of oxygen. It's your autonomic nervous system hijacking your prefrontal cortex because it has that seniority to make that happen. Your brain, in other words, what you call your brain, has an order of operation, and it is built on the framework of emotion. So understand that debates are tools to acquire information and understanding between one another. But when it comes to the matter of what is actually chosen at the end of the day, it is largely, by far, a matter of emotion. So trust and empathy are paramount to success. Do not forget that. Axiom 5. Actually, before I get on to that, we've got a couple more people that came in. We'll make a few acknowledgments real quick. Actually, it's people just coming in. We got Passport OG. Yep, middle class is the engine of a society, indeed. Os. Got Red Lion. He says he's catching it from the beginning. Absolutely. Absolutely. And you guys feel free, when this is concluded, I definitely encourage you to go into the comments and either bring things up or ask a couple questions. These things are designed to be ongoing discussions. So you're more than welcome to treat them that way. And refer this to anybody that you think may find this of use, especially as we move forward we get closer to November. There's going to be a lot of people who are very high on their emotion and they haven't considered how they feel about these things because they just haven't given themselves enough time, or they've been told how to feel about that, which is a very common practice here. Maggie says, you can see the entire playing field from the center. One end requires the other to exist. The middle requires no counterbalance. So interesting. Even in Kinjutsu, this idea of the middle sword attitude is foremost the one that's taught to everything and everybody and preferred, because from the middle attitude, all other attitudes can be assumed within a single step. But people identify that as indecisiveness. It's because they haven't considered that is supposed to be accompanied by foresight and understanding of the environment around you. And in this way, you can create a model of the future, even if it's a fraction of a second, and that leads you to be before the action happens. That is the exact idea of kin no sen, or attacking and forestalling your opponent. This applies to everything. It says Kobe's talent was his willingness to outwork you. Indeed, fam. Passport Energy says everything about this election is emotional. Among other things, fam. Among many other things. Everything about this election is about the lack of intelligent voting constituency. Well, you gotta meet people where they are. And to qualify as unintelligent can be as simple as just having a differing perspective, unfortunately. And that's oftentimes the only requirement, irrespective of one's actual aptitude or awareness of these things. That's probably the greatest unfortunate part of it all. But we've seen this before in religions, though, haven't we? Shout out to Axiom 1. Fred Hampton came in, he says, Os. In the builder, Gold P, how you doing, fam? Indeed, Allah is all in all. Peace to your humble instructor, nameless. Os. Peace to the chat. Peace to you, fam. Os. We got D-Rock then. Salute. Maggie says, it's where muscle memory, instinct, and trauma are well stored. Indeed. Indeed. Shout out to the Vegas nerve. It's all good, fam. You can always catch the playback. But we're about to wind this down. We're on Axiom 5. Axiom 5. Everything has a price. So everything has a cost. I think that this can be combined with what I was formerly going to add to Axiom 7. Which is death and taxes are the currency of freedom. But in reality, I really think I should reanalyze that. I had a conversation with someone about this, and I mulled over it a bit. Everything has a cost, so everything has a price. And the cost and currency of nations is death and taxes. I'm going to combine that into Axiom 5. I think that's appropriate. And I'm going to do that because I believe they're saying the same thing at their core. That this axiom justifies the very need to have the axioms in the first place. It's one thing to have the ability to engage in diplomacy and negotiation. But if you don't have the ability to punish and reward, and the ultimate punishment and reward of statecraft is and has always been death and taxes, your ability to acquire, appropriate, and distribute that is going to have a direct correlation to the degree to which you can maintain negotiation and diplomacy. I think an illustration of this couldn't be better used than Gandhi, and something that Martin Luther King ultimately got criticized for, that I won't put words in his mouth, but I think we all know what conclusion he eventually came to when he started getting down to the real issues at hand, which was the economic disparity on the international level, especially for those that were of higher melanin content. But this idea of peace at all costs at the expense of appropriate action can be compared to the situation that Gandhi was in. When the British were colonizing India and the situation came to a head, the situation that Gandhi was presenting to the British was simple. In that state of being colonized, the British were outnumbered 1 to millions. There were millions there. They were in such a small minority that had that country decided, they just didn't want to hear nothing. They could have outright killed every single one of those people over there. In those conditions, the modality to engage in hard power war was realized. The potential for punishment and reward was present, and it was decisive. When peace was offered, when negotiation and diplomacy was put on the table, it was because the British were actually in a position to actually lose. And if they didn't lose overtly there, they would lose through attrition over having to now dedicate forces to India when so many other things were going on elsewhere in the world. To avoid this, negotiation and diplomacy were placed on the table. In America, individuals in the Black intellectual social complex were in the exact opposite position. We had no standing military. We had no foreign allies. We had no logistic support. We had no modality to punish and reward, but we were demanding negotiation and diplomacy overtly. That is incorrect strategy, and it is because we failed to understand the cost. And what happened to us as a result was largely realized as an act of charity carried out by the Civil Rights Act of 1963 and at Kennedy's assassination. LBJ continuing that spirit that allowed for it to ultimately get usurped by other interests at play, starting with the introduction of the Article 7 Sex Amendment. I'll go in a different video covering that, but I'll simply say that that by and large became a theme for those classified as Black in America for that reason, because we chose to not adhere to one of the earlier axioms. Instead of being the power spoken true, we tried to speak truth to power, and we followed Du Bois' model instead of Booker T's, and instead of building silently and being the master of industry, being a means by which industry was made possible, the likes of which World War I and II would have been impossible without our assistance. Instead of posturing ourselves for that, we asked to be included in colleges so that we could follow what Carter G. Woodson warned as the miseducation of the Negro. These are all matters of cost. When dealing with that absolutism, the final building blocks that is required to pay for things at the end of the day, whether it be overtly or implied, comes all the way back to death and taxes as it relates to states and nationhood and statecraft. That's why you have a decision to make. I'm not advocating for people to go off and engage in political violence. I'm simply saying that violence isn't necessarily physical. And you don't necessarily have to have physical weapons to be armed. Ponder that, consider it, and look very closely at the time you find yourself in. Because I don't think we're going to have another opportunity that the Fourth Industrial Revolution has been presenting now. I think that with Complex and Rael, I may do a series with them breaking down what warfare looks like in the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And I'll use some real examples of what's going on overseas as we speak, and some things that are going on right here just below the border that I think is going to really open some people's eyes as to how close this stuff is hitting home and how asymmetrical combat is really beginning to change things and how it's going to have a massive ripple effect to people at ground zero. And I'm of the subjective opinion, once again, that many people are not prepared for what's on the way because they haven't even conceived ideas like this. It's concerning. And it's all the more reason why I want to get these axioms out to you now for your consideration and meditation. That's why we'll move to the last and final axiom, Axiom 6. When the minority, timing is everything. When you are the majority, everything is a matter of time. When the minority, everything is timing. When the majority, everything is a matter of time. This is the difference between power and force. This is the way those modalities get carried out when I spoke in the preamble about the 3 final or general modalities of war: hard, soft, and smart power. Specifically, those that are forming the policy, when we talk about scale and environment, are you a state? Are you a corporation? Are you a party? Are you an entity? Are you an individual? All of these things adhere to the sixth axiom. When you are the minority, you must find the correct timing, intervene, and like parrying a strike, you seize the balance of your opponent and you can find a way to win. However, if you are like a mountain, your opponent seeks to engage in this long, drawn-out matter of attrition. No matter what they do, you allow them to tire themselves out. And once they are tired, you easily roll over them, and they submit to your will. Those of you familiar with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, this is a very common issue. A means of strategy can be done by just simply being stronger and waiting them out. When your energy reserve is vast compared to those, even if they can strike hard, you need only wait them out. When they're too exhausted to continue, you just simply roll over them. This is the difference between people who control systems and those who have learned systems and found ways of intercepting their weak points. I think what I'm saying is understood in an intrinsic level, and I don't want to spell this out too quickly in this video, but I will be going into great detail of examples of this from people in antiquity and how these things are happening now in the various ways this is occurring in hard, soft, and smart modalities. This is a critical principle. It is our primary strategy, and it is important to understand where you are, because for the majority of us, we have been believing that we are part of a majority, when in fact, we are a scarce minority. It's not a statement to surrender. It's not a statement of weakness. In fact, it is a testament that we have been able to exist in this state of being a minority for so long and not be vanquished by those who would see us not be here. That it is, in a way, paradoxically, become a hindrance. We are, in other words, so strong by ourselves as individuals that we can make it in environments where other people would have been completely destroyed, mentally, physically, or spiritually, and possibly more than that. What we struggle with and suffer from is an issue of autoimmune origin, a social autoimmune issue, where in our lack of trust, we fail to recognize our environment, we fail to recognize our condition, and see that our existence, us still being here, is a sign that everything is okay, because we can refer to other states of our being here in this country, which are far worse than what they are now. But it doesn't make you any less at war. And for many, you are a prisoner of war and don't know it, which is the reason why our intergender conversations with one another and our inability to form not just relationships but institution is greatly hindered. Not only with our XX side, but from those you would call your brother. This is why I put together these axioms, so that when we have these discussions, we can take a step back, look at the bigger picture, and remember we are talking about tools. Ultimately, we are all here because we've shared a similar fate. We've all been assigned this classification of black. As a consequence of that, our relationship with this word differs depending on where our origins were. One way or another, we still share the classification, and we can determine what that means for us as individuals. We don't need to depersonalize things. We don't need to attack each other. Because I think that not only is it in our nature, it is far easier to wish each other success. In doing so, we would have the emotional budget to invest in giving a damn about each other's outcomes then. And you'll find that it is so much easier to use the dynamic of synergy rather than parasitism. It is far superior than indifference. It may be true that some of us may have acquired great strength and made many things happen, but there are still things we can learn from each other. A great deal we can learn. There is no one of us that has something that is able to do everything great all at once at all times. But what we can do is take advantage of the position, the posture that each of us has when we observe this situation as a whole, and find what is useful from the perspective that may be missing from where you're standing looking at the same thing. With regard to that, that is an entire superpower. For the first time in centuries, we've had the ability to all sit together in real time across the world whenever we want to by connecting to the internet. This is not something that can serve as a means to lay out our grievances with one another, but it can also be a means by which we encourage one another. If no one else tells you, I am happy you made it this far, and I wish you continued success, whatever in the hell that looks like for you. So long as we can use that as a baseline, we can figure it out. If nothing else, start from a position of benevolent indifference. You don't have to do anything, but you can acknowledge and respect that you at least got this far and go from there. If it doesn't serve you, leave it alone. If you've the abundance to share something, do so. I think it's in our nature and kind to do the same. This is why I promote this word in this space as often as I can. Os. It is in that spirit that I conclude this conversation, Political Mandalorianism, and tie it up with that phrase, Ware no Michi. This is the way. Before we close out, we've got a little bit of time to answer a couple questions about this if you want to, or if you want to go into a little bit more detail on some of the things we covered. But if not, we will pause here, and I think tomorrow, sometime before next Friday, we'll come on again and I'll have an open dojo session and we can talk about political Mandalorianism after some folks have had time to kind of digest it a little bit. And folks may have some questions, some ideas to bring up, and we can go from there. But we'll keep this open for another 2-3 minutes, and if we don't have too many questions, we'll go ahead and close it out. But I do want to thank you guys for showing up and listening. And for those in the playback, I appreciate you taking time out of your day to take this into consideration. Remember, this is my subjective opinion. I'm not telling anyone what to do, nor do I find myself in a position to do so. I'm not interested in that. What I'm wanting to do is share my subjective opinion and present to you what I see from where I stand. And if it is of service to you, please take what is useful. If it is not, leave it behind. You may find that someone else may be able to find use of it, or you may find use of it in the future. It's here to be of service to you, and that was my intention this evening. Dave Tao, he says, do you think the political Mandalorianism is the only way for black men? No, it's not the only way. It is a way. And I really want to double down on that. A way. And I think that you'll find that there are a lot of things that rhyme with what people are already doing. I will say for me, this is the way that has absolutely worked for me. And I have a suspicion that it will also work for many others. Even though I see myself as being an individual and I know I'm different, I have far more in common with people than I don't. And it's what allows me to find what it is that is different that I can present as a means to serve. It can be of use. It doesn't have to be a point of division. So, no, this isn't the only way, but it is absolutely a way. And for me, this is the way. Got Rayhan up here. He says, peace and blessings, brother. Os to you, fam. Hope everything is going well. Complex Design says, political Mandalorianism equal independent. Independent as it's supposed to be. That's what that's supposed to mean. Back to Axiom 1. Says, salute Nanashi bricks upon bricks for a solid foundation, fam. Indeed. Indeed, that's where it begins. But with that, to the dojo. Os, founders of the space. Os, all of you that have been in the playback and listening and that are in the chat now. Os. This has been the nameless protagonist. Remember, Ware no Michi. This is the way. Os.